Eskerrik asko tortzeagatik, bueno, jende asko ikusten dut gaur. Dakizuen bezala, hau ja da gaurko egungo azkenengo saioa. Goizean Marta Rosler egin du azalpen bat bere lanaren inguruan egonda hitz egiten, pixkat azaltzen zen olako formato ezberdinak lantzen dituen, bideo, turrak eta testuak eta beste formato oso ezberdinak. Beba eduki dugu goizean Ingrid Guardiola, azaltzen artista eta zinemagile ezberdinak zen olako ekarpenak egin dituzten telebistaren inguruan. Eta oraingo honetan Marta Rosler daukagu Born to be Sold filma aurkezteko. Bueno, eso, que arratsaldeon, que muchas gracias por venir. He hecho una pequeña explicación de lo que ha sido la jornada de esta mañana. Como sabéis, este seminario es un dispositivo, un formato de contextualización de la película Electroclash que hemos producido, que desde Consoni hemos producido con la artista María Ruido. Y bueno, va llegando a su fin estos 2 días. Os agradecemos mucho porque la participación ha sido realmente, aparte de numerosa e intensa, quiero decir que la gente está teniendo mucho interés y ha habido conversaciones hoy en la comida muy interesantes. Deciros que eso está llegando a su fin con la película de hoy, con la película de mañana, que tendremos la oportunidad de ver La Comuna aquí en La Lóndiga, en la sala 7 de los cines Golem, que la presentación hará Patrick Watkins, que lo está también hoy con nosotros. Thank you for coming. Y bueno, sin más dilación ya os voy a presentar a Marta Rosler, que supongo que no necesita ya presentación. Es, como os digo, y como ha explicado esta mañana, además, una artista que desarrolla muchos formatos, nacida en Nueva York y desde los años 60-70 con un trabajo muy implicado con cuestiones sociales, feministas, etc. Entonces, comentaros también que tenemos en la mesa junto a nosotras a Julia Morandeira, que es de aquí de Bilbao, pero residente en Barcelona por lo menos de momento. Yo creo que está quedando muy contenta de estos días en Bilbao. Y comentaros que ella es una de las comisarias, gestoras, productoras de la plataforma Loop de videoarte de Barcelona y bueno, amablemente se ha ofrecido voluntaria para ayudarnos a traducir esta pequeña presentación que va a hacer Marta Rosler sobre la película. La veremos, son 35 minutos y posteriormente dejaremos un momento para preguntas. Os animo a que os vayáis preparando las preguntas y quitando el miedo, que es la primera vez que está Marta Rosler en Bilbao y creo que es una pena desaprovecharlo. Así que I'm pushing them to make questions after to see the film. Yeah, you have to stay to the end, but there are 35 minutes, right? I don't think it's going to be an issue. Is 35 minutes? No, 35. Yeah. So, thank you.
That's it. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. This is a work with a strange history. It began as a lecture. I was invited by the Society for Photographic Education in 1987 or 8 by the Women's Caucus to give a keynote speech, because all the keynote speeches by this society of photographers had been given by men, and the Feminist Caucus was very upset about this, the Women's Caucus. And I thought, sure, because I'm actually sometimes I'm a photo historian when I'm not doing other things.
Okay. Bueno. Gracias por venir, Marta Rosler. La historia de esta película se enmarca en una historia un poco curiosa porque parte de una invitación de la Sociedad de Fotógrafos
Photographic education.
De educación fotográfica, que partía la invitación del caucus de mujeres que estaban bastante descontentas porque las invitaciones o las participaciones que han habido en esta asociación, eran siempre desde hombres, y que ella, como empezó a trabajar desde la fotografía, estaba bastante entusiasmada y contenta con la participación.
I thought that I should choose a subject relating to images of women out of courtesy, and I didn't know what to choose. There was a court case that was going on at the time that was very prominent in all the news.
En un primer lugar, pensó que por cortesía debió escoger un tema sobre representación fotográfica de mujeres, pero en aquel momento había un tema que estaba presente en todas las noticias, que era un caso de juzgado.
And I chose this subject particularly because my first reaction to it was that I didn't care about the people involved. And I realized that this was a reaction based on the way the woman in question was represented.
Y la razón por la que escogió este caso era porque su reacción es que no le importaba, porque realmente no le importaban las mujeres que estaban representadas o que estaban implicadas en el caso.
It was a case, the first prominent case about surrogate motherhood, which is having someone bear a child for you. And the woman involved had decided when the baby was born that she couldn't give it up. So there was a very complicated case that was involved with her taking the baby away, and then she was arrested, and her husband was arrested, and then the case was decided against her, and she lost all her parental rights.
Era el primer caso de madre de alquiler en el que la madre, la madre de alquiler, que en inglés es surrogate mother, en el que la madre de alquiler decidió no desprenderse de su hijo una vez que éste nació. Este caso se tornó mucho más complejo de lo que parecía, porque la mujer luchó por guardar al niño, al final acabó en juzgado y el juzgado falló con que tenía que devolver al niño.
The way the woman was a working class woman. She was married. She had several children. She was married to a man who collected garbage for the city. The couple that hired her were middle class. The woman involved was a doctor, and she was a Protestant, and the husband was a Jewish man. The woman doctor was afraid that she had multiple sclerosis and she would get much worse if she had the baby. And they claimed that they wanted to use the husband's sperm because Jews have a history of extermination and they wanted his line to be continued.
La madre de alquiler pertenecía a una clase trabajadora, estaba casada y tenía varios hijos. Su marido trabajaba recogiendo basura para el Estado. Para la ciudad, perdón. Y en cambio los padres que contrataron a la madre de alquiler eran una pareja, ella era doctora y él era un hombre judío, pertenecían a clase media, y el caso, el por qué decidieron de contratar a una madre de alquiler fue porque ella, teniendo esclerosis múltiple, tenía miedo de que eso se pasara al hijo, pero en cambio, como había un gran peso de la tradición judía por parte del marido de que la idea de la genética siguiera, decidieron utilizar su esperma para tener el niño.
The woman in question, Mary Beth Whitehead, was presented in the press as a crazy person who signed a contract and was too hysterical to honor the contract, which of course all middle-class people believe you must honor your contracts. And she was married to a garbage man. She had been a stripper when she was a teenager. And obviously a middle-class family could give a better life to any child than a working-class family.
La madre en cuestión, que se llama Mary Beth Whitehead, la madre de alquiler, fue presentada en la prensa como una mujer totalmente loca y histérica porque renunció a lo que ella se había comprometido en el contrato, un contrato que ella había firmado y una legalidad de un contrato que todo el mundo en la clase media veía como legitimador. Además, ella tenía un pasado de stripper y... Y daban por hecho que el niño creciera dentro de un medio de una clase media era mucho más positivo para el crecimiento del niño.
The lawyer for the surrogacy had arranged the contract, and this is what he specialized in, was finding working class women who would consent for a certain amount of money. By the way, this is now being done in India with European couples outsourcing this to India, that they would pay a certain fee and then the lawyer would get a certain fee. But Mary Beth Whitehead was Catholic, as I said. Her lawyer was also Catholic, and they argued on the basis of mother right, that women had the right to keep their children because this is a kind of sacred thing. So there was on the one hand, contract law and fees, and on the other hand, mother right.
El abogado que hizo todo el contrato digamos del alquiler, de la madre de alquiler, era un abogado especializado en este tipo de contratos que normalmente además buscaba mujeres de clase trabajadora que por una compensación económica iban a gestar al niño, mientras, y que, inciso, esto es una práctica que ahora en la actualidad se hace mucho en India, muchos parejas europeas están exportando esa problemática para buscar madres de alquiler en India. Y el problema fue que por parte de Mary Beth Whitehead era católica y el abogado de Mary Beth Whitehead, que luego la defendió en el caso, también era católico, y entonces apelaron al derecho de maternidad como un derecho de creencia sagrada, es decir, que el hijo que tú tienes es tuyo y te pertenece. Entonces, por una parte, vemos esta, digamos, dialéctica entre el contrato legal y la ley contra el derecho de maternidad de la creencia.
In organizing my talk, I based it on the images of the different parental figures and their lawyers in the press, both the educated press like the New York Times and also the popular press.
Para organizar su presentación, investigó los papeles de los abogados, de los dos tipos de abogados en la repercusión mediática y en varios tipos de prensa. En la prensa, digamos, más de un nivel popular y de otro tipo de prensa.
But when and the first question from the audience was a man who jumped up and said, "What does this have to do with photography?" Which I found extremely interesting, because if I could have paid someone to ask that question, I probably would have, because it was exactly what the discussion was supposed to open up into, of the representation of women and how this is beneath the attention of photographic scholars and historians.
Entonces, cuando dio la presentación, la primera pregunta que surgió del público fue de un hombre que le preguntó: ¿qué tiene que ver esto con la fotografía? A lo que Marta dice que si hubiera podido pagar una pregunta, que para que alguien le hiciera una pregunta, hubiera sido esa, porque realmente su interés era abrir un espacio de discusión en el que este tipo de cuestiones sobre la representación de la mujer va mucho más allá de cualquier tipo de discusión que un académico de la fotografía puede tener.
When I was approached by Paper Tiger to make a half-hour television show about this, I had to think, what kind of strategy can I use to make a half-an-hour show, which turned into 35 minutes, out of a fairly academic paper.
Cuando Paper Tiger se acercó a Marta para proponerle un espacio de media hora para presentar esta cuestión y esta investigación, pues bueno, Marta empezó a ordenar lo que luego fue una presentación de 35 minutos, que es la película.
Paper Tiger is a self-organized group of media activists who have a public access show on cable television and have now, I think this is their 35th anniversary. They were formed specifically to dissect in public newspapers, TV, and other elements of the media.
Paper Tiger es una plataforma autogestionada, una asociación autogestionada de media activistas que tienen un espacio en la televisión por cable, que de hecho este año creemos que cumplen 35 años, y que bueno, se dedican a, digamos, a atacar, un poco a abrir o a analizar todas estas cuestiones que salen en la prensa.
I worked with them in 1981 or two, I guess it was 1982, doing a live performance, and the first thing I said is, if we do something together, it can't be live, it has to be edited, and there has to be some kind of rehearsal.
La primera vez que trabajó con ellos fue en 1991 o 1992 y le invitaron para hacer una performance live, pero Marta dijo que siempre que trabajaran el trabajo tenía que estar editado y montado, que no podía ser una live performance.
The aesthetic of Paper Tiger is that they believe in cheap media, by which they mean you have to be able to see from what you're looking at that this could be done by anybody. I happen to subscribe to the same ideas, cheap media.
Digamos, el principio de estética o la estética de Paper Tiger está basado en la pobreza de los medios. Es decir, que cuando tú ves algo tienes que pensar que tú eres también capaz de hacerlo. Y pues coincide en que Marta también suscribe a este tipo de ideas de pobreza mediática.
The big difference is they liked painted backdrops like in the theater, and I liked photographic blue screens. So half of it involves painted backdrops, and then for a part, that I edited in California away from them, it's got photographic backdrops.
La única diferencia, el único punto de diferencia es que en Paper Tiger preferían los fondos pintados y en cambio Marta prefiere los blue walls o los fondos de pantalla fotográficos. Entonces vais a ver diferencias en el trabajo porque hay parte que son fondos que son pintados y en cambio otros que son fondos fotográficos, de imagen fotográfica, que los editó ella una vez en California, bastante lejos de Paper Tiger y donde se filmó.
We only had access to studios in the middle of the night, so we were all completely exhausted with every take. And I had decided to keep the element of it being a spoken talk, not a script.
Solamente tenían acceso a los estudios por la noche, por lo que vais a ver que estaban bastante cansados después de cada toma. Y otra cosa que Marta decidió es que no habría guión, que sería una conversación hablada.
So I consider myself a Brechtian. One of the things about Brechtian theater is that there's supposed to be a slight distance between the actor and the script, meaning that the audience should apprehend that this is a play being performed. So one way I tried to do that was actually to have people standing there holding the script and pulling up the sheets. I'm reading straight off the paper, and you can hear the paper being removed and dropped on the floor, but I don't think they were ever actually on camera.
Marta se define como brechtiana y uno de los principios de la teoría de Brecht en relación al teatro es que debe haber un espacio entre el actor y el guión, de modo que la audiencia pueda entender, pueda aprender que eso es una representación. Entonces, en la película vais a ver cómo hay actores que están leyendo el guión directamente y tirando, arrancando hojas de guión que hay veces que sale y a veces que no.
But in order to keep the audience from completely falling asleep, I decided I should play all the characters. So I was every character, you'll see, but you know, both Mary Beth Whitehead and the other woman, and I didn't play the husband. Actually, I did, but in another form. And the baby, and who had two names. The baby was given different names by the different parents, and the lawyers and the judge in the case.
Para evitar que la audiencia o los espectadores se quedaran dormidos, Marta decide interpretar absolutamente todos los roles de toda la obra. Desde las dos madres, Mary Beth Whitehead, la madre que pide el alquiler, el marido no, pero bueno, ha dicho que en otras formas sí que lo hizo. Los abogados, los jueces, etcétera, etcétera. El bebé, que tuvo además dos nombres, dependiendo de cada madre.
And the other thing is that we were friends with Rick Prelinger, who owns an archive, a huge archive of mostly educational films from the US. And we used some of these films. I liked to take images from the recent past. So a lot of my work is about things that we recognize but are not current. And I used some of the material from the Prelinger archive that was from the 50s, actually, and the 60s. So this work was made at the end of the 1980s, but it draws on these images that are from people's memory but not current.
Marta era amiga de Rick Prelinger, que tenía un archivo de, sobre todo, películas educacionales o de educación, y a Marta le gusta mucho trabajar con el pasado reciente, es decir, con imágenes que suenan familiares, pero que no pertenecen realmente a la actualidad. Entonces, la película, aunque estaba situada en los años 80, toma películas o imágenes de los 50, 40, de las imágenes que tiene ese archivo.
Kind of collective memory of American media culture. And the last piece, and then I'll be done, is we went and videotaped, because it was tape in those days, at a place called Babyland on Times Square, where babies were born out of cabbages, baby dolls were born out of cabbages. You want to?
Retomando la cuestión del archivo, esto también era, en cierto sentido, para trabajar con una memoria colectiva mediática de los media. Y luego la última parte de la película está filmada en Times Square, en un sitio que se llama
Babyland.
Babyland, el territorio de los niños, o Babylandia o Bebelandia, que era un lugar donde los bebés, que bueno, en verdad eran muñecas, nacían de las calabazas.
And in Babyland, women act as the midwives, the baby comes out of the cabbage, and then the audience of people in the store are asked to name the baby. So we supplied the names, and they were we yelled them out. They were the names that the baby M, who was also baby S, was given.
En Babyland, estos niños que nacen de las calabazas, o sea, hay matronas que ayudan a los niños a nacer y entonces se los dan al público y el público grita les grita nombres, o sea, les bautiza con un nombre ahí. Entonces, Martha, lo que hicieron es que se gritaran los nombres del niño en cuestión de la película, que es Baby M o Baby S, que la audiencia gritará esos nombres.
And that leads me to explain the title. The title is Born to be Sold, The Strange Case of Baby S/M. But the S is also a $sign, but of course S and M also represents sadomasochism. So the title is a little bit of a wordplay.
Eso también nos lleva a explicar el título de la película, que es Nacido para ser vendido, el extraño caso de el bebé S/M. S y M son los dos nombres que se le dieron, pero S normalmente también estaba escrito como un signo del dólar, pero también, por otra parte, S y M remite a sadomasoquismo, por lo tanto, el título también es un juego de palabras.
Thank you, and now we will leave the stage, and hopefully we will watch the movie, and you can have some reaction.
Dad,
Yes?
where do babies come from anyhow?
Why, mothers bring them into the world.
But why do mothers bring them?
Johnny, by the grace of heaven, mothers are the only ones who know how to bring babies into the world.
That's right, Dad.
This is the vial that has the sperm in it.
What we're doing is putting technology down on the table and saying, let's create your child.
Well, we have one beautiful egg.
You're not really a man if you can't father a child.
Even borrowing somebody else's body.
I'm going to be the baby motel. I'm going to be the baby motel.
Surrogate parenting can be a joy or a horror, with no laws yet to protect us and to guide us through our technology, our desires, and our dreams. Betsy Aaron, ABC News, New York.
My baby. She's yours. Take good care of her.
Focus on the body is a favorite route to social control, from laws regulating sexual behavior to laws against suicide to lie detector tests and blood tests for drugs and for AIDS. These bodily traces provide a suitably fragmented reading of body parts that aren't even parts in any normal sense of the word. These readings are made by and for an ill-defined society whose boundaries and contents are equally obscure. In tune with this vision of the world as a bunch of pieces, there's a greater and greater trend towards seeing the world as a set of incommensurabilities, an impossible jigsaw puzzle whose parts we can never seem to fit together. More and more, we see the world as made up of individuals, families, and their private life up against a great, big, dangerous, and obscure world that's best left to the care of the state. This is the world according to Ollie North. In other words, we're losing the conviction that we can affect the world. The concept of a public sphere in which every citizen participates in social decision-making is disappearing very fast, and the boundaries of personal action are closing in. This may help explain why the desperate desire to have children is taken for granted. The world seems to offer few rewards for the childless and few ways outside family life to make a meaningful mark. In thinking about the ties between the fragmentariness of experience, anti-feminist backlash, and the overheated desire to possess a child, I want to focus on the case of baby S, known to the world as baby M.
Tonight, an ABC miniseries. In 1985, Mary Beth Whitehead signed a contract.
She's giving birth to our baby. She's not going to raise it. We are.
To be impregnated by William Stern and to surrender the baby to him and his childless wife, Betsy.
I love you.
On March 27th, 1986.
We have a baby girl.
The contract was broken.
I don't think I can go through it.
You agreed to do it. It's in the contract that you signed.
Tonight, the story continues.
Where's the kid?
Please, no. They're stealing my baby and they're letting them get away with it.
Everybody's talking about mother's rights. I'm a father. Fathers have dreams too.
You agreed to do it. He said, you agreed to do it. He said, you agreed to do it. He said, you agreed to do it.
In seeking a baby, the Sterns had sought the services of Noel Keene, a lawyer running a business called the Infertility Clinic. Keene arranged for Mary Beth Whitehead to bear a child for Mr. Stern through artificial insemination. When Mrs. Whitehead refused to surrender the child, the Sterns hired a well-known divorce and custody lawyer named Gary Skoloff to help them get the baby. Mrs. Whitehead's lawyer was Harold Cassidy. The New Jersey family court judge before whom they appeared was Harvey Sorkow.
You agreed to do it. He said, 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 you agreed.
Initially, this case had no interest for me, until I noticed that the representations of Mrs. Whitehead bore the signs of certain confluences of class, gender, and assigned social role. Mary Beth Whitehead, or Mary Beth Whitehood, as I and others began to call her, a slip of the tongue standing in for Mary Beth Motherhood of this baby M for motherhood case. Mrs. Whitehead became the inscription on a certain woman, the representative of her class, of all the attributes of woman, much as Gail Rubin and Marshall Solins describe them in the following quotation. Gail Rubin writes in The Traffic in Women, quote, "The phallus is more than a feature which distinguishes the sexes. It is the embodiment of the male status, to which men accede and in which certain rights inhere, among them the right to a woman. It is an expression of the transmission of male dominance. If power is a male prerogative and must be passed on, it must go through the woman in between." Marshall Solins once suggested that the reason women are so often defined as stupid, polluting, disorderly, silly, profane, or whatever, is that such categorizations define women as incapable of possessing the power which must be transferred through them, unquote. All the references to difference, all the attributes of the other were accreted on the public body of Mary Beth Whitehead. She was portrayed in open court. The judge, whose abuse of her in his decision matched that offered in any testimony, reportedly sought but failed to have the trial closed to the public. She was portrayed in open court as ignorant, untrustworthy, unstable, and profoundly deceitful and manipulative, quote, with a fundamental inability to understand and tell the truth, unquote. She was called by the famous child psychologist Lee Salk, who never met or interviewed her, quote, not a mother, but a rented uterus, unquote. Dr. Salk himself was the victor in a reportedly ugly child custody suit in his own divorce case. The psychological experts paid by the Stearns evaluated Whitehead on strictly class-bound criteria, and they engaged unashamedly in the classic double bind. Her wish to keep the child was taken as the sign of possessiveness and a, quote, mixed personality disorder, unquote, and so presented in court, though the psychiatrist who had invented this classification later disclaimed its application to her. Trivial incidents became principles underlying Whitehead's character. The experts offered no parallel observations on the Stearns' desire to get the baby, since it was the Stearns who were paying them. The character assassinations of Whitehead, the rented uterus, included that she was inauthentic because, prematurely gray at 29, she dyed her hair black. That she inappropriately gave teddy bears rather than a cup and spoon to the baby to play with. That she cried, hooray, instead of patty cake when the baby clapped her hand.
Rented uterus. Rented uterus. Rented uterus.
Mary Beth Whitehead became the imaginary representative of all women, all mothers, all of us uteri, all of us creatures of deceit, all hysterics. Her husband, in this case reduced to a mere attribute of herself, is a vasectomized, read castrated, and now twice cuckolded mama's boy. He is also, famously, a garbage man, a Viet vet with a drinking problem. She is the inevitable high school dropout and go-go dancer, teen bride, and teen mother. She is the acted upon, the recipient of yuppie sperm, who broke the rules and tempted fate by daring to take on the role of actor, defying the identity ascribed to her by class history and patriarchy. More to the point, the Stearns, their lawyers, the experts, the judge, and the court-appointed guardian all are middle class, and the Whiteheads are working class. The members of the media, too, represent the interests of the middle class, though this is a more problematic argument. It's the business of a class to reproduce itself, to see its ideas reproduced in its children. It's no wonder that the child-rearing practices of the working-class couple drove all these middle-class people crazy. It's part of working-class self-reproduction to produce subjectivities in their children that will not give rise to the same assumptions of prerogative and opportunity that bourgeois child-rearing intends to instill in its children.
S&M baby kiss. 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 S&M baby kiss.
We're now a consumer, not a producer nation. Working class men are almost superfluous, and the working class is becoming a service class. Why don't we dismember the working class, shatter its ego identities, and replace them with our own? The working class won't be mere servants of the middle class, but its vessels, its uteri, defined by its females. Once upon a time, it was thought that men planted sperm in the womb's fertile ground, and the sperm, envisioned as a tiny man, a homunculus, grew in the favorable environment. The surrogacy idea comes very close to returning us to the homunculus theory. Part slave and part rental unit, you can be a self-storage unit for the homunculus egos of middle-class men. Organ transplants don't define identity any more than a replacement part defines a machine. So we'll use your genes and reproductive powers to revitalize our own. We'll toss your historical continuity on the junk heap of history while you provide continuity for the identities of rich, middle-class men. Why not implant welfare mothers with bourgeois embryos, killing two birds with one stone? After all, if they're having our babies, they can't be having their own.
Baby kiss, S&M baby kiss, S&M baby kiss, S&M baby kiss, S&M baby kiss.
Consider the theater of naming. On one side, we have Mr. and Dr. Stern, proverbial yuppies, he a biochemist, she a pediatrician. On the other side, we have Mary Beth Whitehead, or simply Mary Beth, as she was called by the media. Then we have the baby, baptized Sarah Elizabeth Whitehead by the Whiteheads, named Melissa Elizabeth Stern by William and Elizabeth Stern. When the Sterns took Mrs. Whitehead to court to force her to give them the baby, the Sterns' lawyer used the name Baby M for Melissa, and it was accepted by the court. We might say that the acceptance of this name by Judge Sorkow was a good indicator of the way this case was going to go. The mother, the working-class woman, was not granted the status of adult signified by last name reference. Her child, Baby S, is not one granted existence. Rather, Baby M, the child of the other gender and other class, is the one granted a name. On the other hand, Mrs. Whitehead called Bill Stern Mr. Sperm in private. Mr. Stern complained to the TV cameras, "No one ever talks about the rights of fathers." Precisely wrong. That right seems to have been uppermost in the mind of the family court judge, at least. Not only are rulings for the mother in custody cases, in fact, the historical exception, the decision favors the father increasingly often nowadays. But in any case, we ought to question what Stern had in mind by referring to himself as a father, since it should be clear that the father, up to the point of the baby's seizure, was Richard Whitehead. In acting out father right on the bodies of both the baby and Mrs. Whitehead, the judge and the baby's guardian, Lorraine Abraham, appointed by Judge Sorkow, granted sperm a magic power, the phallic power described by Gail Rubin, elevating it not only above the ovum, but above the process and experience of 9 months gestation, the bodily activity of generating a child out of one's own bodily resources and performing the labor, the work of giving it birth.
Today, Mary Beth Whitehead would become the first surrogate mother ever forced by an American court to give up her child, to have all her legal rights terminated.
Stunned. It's like I have tingling feelings in my elbow right now.
Ultimate defeat for Mary Beth Whitehead came after the decision was announced. Judge Sorkow called Stern's wife Elizabeth into his chambers and in a quiet, private ceremony allowed her to adopt the infant. So in addition to a new name and a permanent home, Melissa now also has a new mother. Tim O'Brien, ABC News, Hackensack, New Jersey.
The thing about this that's so intriguing is that it is not in the best interests of women. Women cannot get babies this way. Men can get babies. If at the end, if at that 10 minutes, Mr. Stern had turned to Mrs. Stern and said, "I want a divorce," she would be in real trouble about getting access to that child.
Women cannot have babies. Did Mrs. Stern just acquire a baby? Is she not now a mother?
Now she did, okay? Yeah. Now she did by adopting this child, but she cannot hire a surrogate mother. Only men, women who are married to men without sperm cannot hire surrogate mothers. Women who do not have men in their lives cannot hire surrogate mothers. Men can hire surrogate mothers.
Along the lines of character assassination, we might offer the following questions. What do you make of a doctor who, self-diagnosed with an ailment that pregnancy might or might not worsen, decide without other medical advice to buy, not bear, a child, to pay someone to accept her husband's sperm, and to deliver a child for which she, not the birth mother, will be the surrogate? But we needn't play this game of pitting the two women against each other. Whatever her character, Elizabeth Stern's attitude was sufficiently instrumental, sufficiently convinced that bodies and the people in them might be the instruments for the accomplishment of her desires and purposes, or her husband's. Her comment, after the judge's vitriol and months of public recrimination, all directed at Mrs. Whitehead, was that under other circumstances they all did like each other, but that in any case, and these are her words, she gave us a beautiful daughter. The Whiteheads, of course, don't see any of this their way. What I want to assassinate in the Stearns characters is their sense of ownership and entitlement at someone else's expense in everything but money. It's not so hard to imagine the Stearns, who invested time and longing and some money, but finally nothing else, simply walking away from the problem by recognizing Whitehead's desperation. Instead, they got a court order to seize, why not say kidnap, the baby. They know for whom the law of the father works. The court-appointed guardian told Mrs. Whitehead to save her tears for the television cameras and asked her who would play her in the movie. Out with her authenticity were supposed to go her qualities befitting a womanly woman, that is, a mother. But this wasn't matched by a need to construct the authenticity of the Stearns, whom the judge pronounced sensitive and sincere. Their occupations, their social status, their clothing, their hairstyles, Dr. Stearns' tasteful pearls said it all. The statistics about infertility, which claim that 1 in 6 U.S. couples are infertile, are manipulated statistics. They include people with 1 or more children already who are experiencing difficulty having more, for example. And they don't tell you that black and poor women are more likely to be infertile but aren't in any position to take advantage of the expensive remedies. But the tremendous attention to the baby craze has added to the pressure on individual women to keep trying and trying and trying, which means going through unpleasant, demeaning, and painful procedures, from intercourse on demand in doctors' offices to repeated surgical invasions through such procedures as laparoscopies and uterine lavage. The development of these new reproductive technologies, which doctors rushed into the world when they had extremely low or absent success rates, is seen by many of the doctors developing them as business with tremendous potential for financial reward. If the fact that a number of these techniques, from the primitive one of artificial insemination to the more sophisticated one of embryo transfer, were developed in cows makes you uncomfortable, I suggest you trust your instincts about the attitude toward women they embody.
The medical technology is a given. You've created and developed and have proven that this non-surgical embryo transfer is state-of-the-art, it works, it's wonderful. But that doesn't translate into getting one woman to say, I will toss away all my concerns and my ethics and my morality and the advice of friends and relatives or my physician and share my fertility. Can you, in fact, retain a significant number, let's say 50 donors per each market that the program would go in? That was the essence of what we were there to find out. And I bring you, I think, good tidings. Absolutely and unequivocally, yes.
Doctors specializing in this stuff are criticized for concentrating on profit. They are accused not only of withholding treatment from those who can't pay as much as $100,000, but also of patenting their procedures, which may violate medical ethics, and for advertising and charging for treatments properly regarded as experiments. Some of the companies have gone public.
My baby. She's yours.
But let's get back to surrogacy, which may be technologically primitive, but it's right up there with the industrialization of motherhood and the commercialization of babies. First, a word about its economics and politics. The men who run the surrogacy centers, pimps some have called them, because it's hard to miss the analogy between selling sexual services and selling reproductive services have six-figure incomes. Noel Keane, who brought the Stearns and Whitehead together, grosses $600,000 a year. The rented mothers make $10,000 for the work of 9 months plus the pre-fertilization period.
They're of substantial wealth. They're generally professional people, either lawyers, doctors, or successful business persons. that are earning enough money to pay for the costs associated with this program, which is around $25,000. The couples will pay you a $10,000 fee. In addition to that, they will pay all the related expenses.
Expenses include Keene's fee, now $10,000.
If a surrogate mother carries for 30 days and then miscarries, what happens?
No compensation.
3 months, and then loses.
At 3 or 4 months, I believe she's compensated in the amount of $500.
And then if she goes 8 months and loses the child?
8th and 9th month, she is paid a maximum under most agreements of $3,000.
I see. Stillborn at 9 months or something of that sort?
For the most part, $3,000.
What if the baby is born deformed?
Well, she's entitled to her full fee.
The $10,000?
That's correct, and with total obligations on behalf of the father.
When the mother, the surrogate, the woman under contract, delivers in the hospital, the baby is then turned over to the couple, the biological father, and the adopting mother, right?
That's correct.
So one can say that at that time, giving the money, and they get the baby, you are in effect selling that baby.
Well, one could say that, but then I would simply come back to you and say to whom? To the father, who has every right and every obligation, no matter how the child is born?
But half the baby, under contract in effect, belongs to the surrogate mother. Half father, the genetic father, half the surrogate mother.
That's correct.
And so, in effect, the surrogate mother is selling her half of that baby for $10,000.
I'll accept that if somebody wants to make that point.
Surrogate mothers are subjected to a battery of psychological tests to see if they display the right traits. It's not mental health that's being tested for. This isn't some arcane search for possibly heritable emotional quirks. What's being sought is an appropriately docile woman who'll follow orders and won't change her mind or fight. During the trial, the Whiteheads and their lawyer, Harold Cassidy, still imagined the case could be argued in terms of mother right, which had seemed in the past to underlie rulings, quote, in the best interest of the child, unquote, in the United States for the better part of a century. But the Stearns lawyer, Gary Skoloff, was a divorce custody specialist. And as professionals who understood the role of professionals in policing families, to borrow a phrase, the Stearns also understood the ritual deployment of paid experts. The Whiteheads argued a defensive case. The Stearns attacked. Cassidy, the Whiteheads' lawyer, refused to attack the Stearns' character at all. Skoloff had no such compunction, because attack is the way of it in family court. The Stearns scored extra on appropriateness and savvy.
The way I see it is 1 out of 7 couples are infertile. We're moving towards a way of solving the problem of the tremendous pain of 1 out of 7 couples. And may I say that we've got to face it because it's going to happen no matter what any state does. It's like, can you ever get rid of the atom bomb now that it's here?
Skoloff, something of a media hound, also had the knack of President Reagan in appropriating language and rhetoric. Thus, he represented himself as a feminist, arguing on talk shows that those who were against surrogacy were saying that women were too stupid to decide how to use their own bodies.
The really critical point is, the argument is being made that what we need are laws and judges to protect these stupid women who actually are trying to make a decision. They want to do something, and oh no, we need laws, we need people in black robes to tell a woman, you cannot do that, what you want to do, even if it's for a good social purpose. I find that very offensive, and there are many feminists who find that very offensive also.
Public upset with Mrs. Whitehead centered on her violation of the contract in which she agreed to give Stern the baby, and that was the sole basis on which the Stearns could bring suit. Although the allegations centered on her fitness, not on technical questions of law. In the Baby SM case, in the service of class, all facets of the law, at bottom class law, were bent to fit. Despite the dechattelization of women and children, who used to fall under the absolute rule of the patriarch, Contract law, which represents and regulates patrimony primarily in the form of property relations, was the iron rod of punishment wielded against Mrs. Whitehead. It has been argued that the contract in the case involved not the sale of a baby, but the promise to perform a service for hire. Still, the outcome suggests that the baby is an element of property after all. In any case, Whitehead refused the $10,000 fee and kept the baby until it was snatched away. There is no precedent for this in service contracts. You can't make someone do something she refuses to do just because she signed a paper. At most, she would owe financial reparation for breach of contract. The judge could have ignored the contract in ruling on custody. Instead, he went out of his way to affirm the contract. In contrast, by law, a woman offering her child for adoption has a grace period in which to change her mind, and it is against the law for her to sign the baby away before birth. Although this provision, too, is a patriarchal support, not to apply it in the case of surrogacy is simply biological paternity regnant. It's always possible that the state, in defense of the family, which is often called the bulwark of the capitalist system, will outlaw surrogacy and drive it underground. I have a feeling that to oppose surrogacy right now would be like being against alcohol in the late 19th century. Hopeless, even wrong-headed. Temperance feminism painted itself into a corner the way I think that anti-porn feminism has. So we've got to have much better safeguards for women who bear babies for others and much better controls over the more technologically dominated forms of reproduction. Women who are surrogates have got to get together and protect themselves the way prostitutes have. The industrialization of reproduction, with its emphasis on product and quality control over more human values, has to be combated. Still, I can't close without saying that the vision of poor women being impregnated with rich men's sperm, or women of color being implanted with white yuppie embryos, is a sorry one indeed. The fragmentation and instrumentalization that surrogacy presupposes is symbolically loaded onto the bodies of poor women, and that ultimately affects us all.
No one ever said to me, "It's your baby, and there's a possibility when she grows up and finds out that you sold her, she might hate your guts." Perhaps some people think the baby would be better off with people like the Stearns. Many of the newspaper stories made that point, that I didn't finish high school. The idea people got from that was that I couldn't be a good mother. I couldn't be a good mother if I didn't finish high school and I was married to a garbage man. What they all ignored, however, was that I was a good mother. Bill and Betsy Stern have money and are educated, and they got to the courthouse first. I didn't think I ever had a chance. I didn't think any of the women you'll hear this morning ever had a chance. The economics of surrogacy in this country are simple. The sperm donors are well off, and the women they hire to bear their children generally are not.
I did not begin this as a public crusade, but I'm gratified to see that surrogacy has been discredited and delighted to know that my relationship with my daughter will continue for the rest of our lives.
This Mother Cabbage is going into labor right now. If you watch carefully, you can see she's already at 3.5, I'd say 4 leaves apart. Now, this procedure I'm doing right now is called an easiotomy. Thank goodness I've never had to perform a C. Thank you. That'd be a cabbage section. This looks like a normal delivery. Head first. Oh, thank you, doctor. Baby has green eyes. Feisty kid, could you cut the cord, please? Oh, we have a bouncing baby girl. Now, to help us welcome this cute little girl into the world, we need 2 people to help us name her. She needs a first name and a middle name.
Sarah.
Okay, Sarah will be her first name.
And Melissa.
Melissa?
Sarah Melissa.
Sarah Melissa will be this little girl's name. Now, she's up for adoption now. If you'd like to come visit her in the newborn nursery, Dr. Diaz is going to take her over there and clean her, weigh her, make sure she's just as healthy as she looks. Ladies and gentlemen, the Babyland staff is proud to announce the successful delivery of a bouncing baby girl. Her name is Sarah Melissa. She weighs 2 pounds 3 ounces and is 22 inches long.
¡Yuhu! Dado a mi madre a Dios, me habría oído. Que eso es el momento de hacer cualquier pregunta si queréis, por favor. ¿Alguien tiene alguna cuestión? A mí se me ocurren unas cuantas, pero es que claro. Yeah. Alguien me decía hoy en la comida que daba como vergüenza preguntar que por qué no habíamos puesto algún sistema ahí tipo Twitter o así para... Pero bueno, no sé. O si no, escribidla y ni se la pasáis a ella y la leemos, no sé. Si a alguien le da vergüenza, digo, decirla en alto. O os doy mi número y me enviáis un mensaje.
Hola. Yo quería preguntar sobre la reflexión... No, luego se la traduces, ¿no? Sí. Sobre la reflexión que habéis hecho igual en el momento, lo que has dicho antes, ¿no? Sobre la representación de las figuras que salen en la película por parte de los medios de comunicación. Y si vosotros mismos... o de qué manera vosotros os habéis apropiado de esos códigos que tenían los medios o que siguen teniendo los medios en aquel momento para hacer vuestra película, ¿no? O sea, si habéis pensado en esto de girar un poco la dirección de los códigos de poder, ¿no? O cómo lo habéis conseguido o si lo habéis pensado.
In relation to the representation of the characters, how have you engaged? I mean, how have you envisaged the appropriation of the codes of representation of the media? If you thought just to appropriate those codes or to actually subvert them in some kind of way?
I'll begin by saying that we had a fight about using footage from television, including the interviews with the lawyer and the court hearings, because Paper Tiger feels that you always have to make sure that the audience understands this is not you. And I said, sure, but we need this footage because it interposes the speech of these figures that we couldn't use otherwise. We wouldn't have access to them. And because it also shows their own public self-presentation. So we often showed it on a TV set, and or put subtitling or voiceover or funny music over it. The other characters, aside from the Whiteheads, were portrayed as losers, and the contracting couple and the lawyer were presented as winners, people who knew how to act. So it was my intention to move the discussion somewhere else.
Bueno, hubo un gran problema, una gran lucha sobre la apropiación, sobre utilizar el footage, lo que estaba grabado de la televisión, sobre todo en relación a los abogados y a los jueces que estaban representados. En Paper Tiger TV advirtieron a Marta de que tenía que tener claro que la audiencia no era ella, o sea, que no estaba en la misma posición. Pero Marta insistió en que utilizar ese footage grabado era muy necesario por dos razones. Uno, para sobreponer los dos discursos, y segundo, porque era necesario dar a ver la representación que se hacía de la personalidad pública de cada una de las figuras que estaban representadas. Entonces, normalmente en la película también se enseñaba esta filmación como en un plato de televisión o en una caja de televisión, con música por encima, etcétera, etcétera. Pero era muy importante dar a ver cómo los Whiteheads estaban retratados como perdedores, y en cambio cómo la pareja contratante, los Stearns, estaban representados, y su abogado también, estaban representados como ganadores, como personas que sabían cómo hacer las cosas, ¿no?
I also decided to use the footage of the mini drama that was made because it was so soap opera-ish, and to show another representation of the bad parties and the good parties, the hysterical woman and the couple who doesn't understand why they can't have their baby. So this was another way of circling around the representations of these figures.
Que también le interesaba la grabación de este pequeño mini-drama que se creó, que tenía como muchas connotaciones de culebrón o telenovela, que también daba lugar a otro tipo de representación de las partes, las parejas, los abogados, etcétera, porque en el fondo dejaba como terminar el círculo de esta representación con esos diferentes enfoques.
But it wasn't only about the characters, it was also about the news coverage and the way that the various media figures, the newsreaders, presented the story. So there are a number of different stories coming up through the media, and with the very clear points of view.
Que no era solamente sobre los personajes, sino también las diferentes formas de cubrir la noticia, los diferentes noticiarios, bueno, los diferentes lugares donde salió la noticia. Entonces, era también dar a ver, es un abanico más de las historias diferentes de diferentes puntos de vista.
In fact, I have
no interest in the people as people. They're people. I was interested in them as representations of roles assigned to them in a particular drama, sometimes self-assigned. Nevertheless, it was that got my attention, to see that there was a stereotypical set of people that were offered to us, regardless of who those people actually were.
Que realmente lo que le interesa no es la gente en sí, o sea, son gente y está bien, pero lo que le interesa son los roles que se les aplica a esta gente, muchas veces autoaplicados, y que cómo dan lugar a estereotipos que muchas veces nos vienen dados, no son impuestos, más allá de lo que tú puedas ver en una persona, más allá de la persona.
And just to underline that point, psychology was used as a discursive weapon against Mary Beth Whitehead, and psychological traits and psychological questions were not applied to the contracting couple, the Stearns. They were people, good people, and no one ever questioned their motives, except the most elite newspaper, The Times, and the answer was the Holocaust, that he's entitled because Jews have been through the Holocaust, which I don't think is a very good argument, but you know, that was, so he offered a non-psychological argument. This was not about possessiveness, but about a kind of communal destiny.
Bueno, que además la psicología fue utilizada como un arma discursiva en contra de Mary Beth Whitehead, que no se aplicó a los Stern o a la pareja contractual. Ellos eran vistos como personas y cuyos argumentos o cuyos derechos nadie cuestionó, excepto un periódico de élite que acudió a la cuestión del Holocausto como no como una razón psicológica, sino como una razón de destino comunitario que se le debía, que era su derecho a tener el hijo. La hija, perdón. Hay una cosa que quiero aclarar que me he confundido antes, y es que los bebés no nacían de calabazas, sino de col o repollos. Pero bueno, creo que lo habéis podido ver todos.
Gracias. Quería preguntarle, dos cuestiones que en realidad están relacionadas. ¿Cómo había sido la reacción pública ante la emisión? Y muy especialmente, ¿cómo había sido la reacción dentro, digamos, del feminismo, de ciertos círculos del feminismo? Porque los años 80 son especialmente importantes, digamos, es el declive del feminismo liberal y la apertura hacia otros discursos poscoloniales, cuestiones de clase aparecen, y cuestiones como la pornografía, que divide al feminismo, o a diferentes ramas, diferentes visiones dentro del feminismo.
So she wants to know what was the reaction to my piece or to the case?
To your piece. What was the reason for the emission in general, and specifically to certain circles of feminism, especially especially in the case of the 80s, when feminism has this tour de force into opening up to there's the decline. Well, of the decline of the liberal feminism is how we understand, in a way, this feminism that was more we saw during the 70s. Maybe, ¿puedes explicar más lo que entiendes como feminismo liberal?
Bueno, me refiero, sobre todo en Estados Unidos, durante los años 70, digamos que hay una parte o cierto feminismo que es bastante influyente y que tiene visibilidad, y quizá en los 80 empieza a fragmentarse. Me refiero, bueno, por llamarle de alguna manera, ¿no? Me refiero a ese feminismo que tenía más visibilidad y que era un feminismo que venía, un feminismo burgués, ¿no? De la tradición burguesa.
I didn't understand that, no.
That in the 70s in the States there was a more mainstream time of feminism. There was more that had a bigger, more that had much more influence and much more visibility. That in the 80s it starts to crack up. It starts to have different ruptures, especially because of the decline of its own corpus, but also because of opening up to other types of discourses such as postcolonialism, the debate on pornography, etc., etc. So going back to the question, is the reaction to your program, and especially the reaction from this type of feminisms?
So the broader audiences of women were the reception was very positive. The problem came from academic feminists. One woman accused me of being allied with the bourgeois couple, which I found inexplicable. This is actually a well-known artist, but who did this? I still don't get it. And there was an article in a feminist publication attacking the work by a woman who was a film scholar who had obtained a baby through surrogacy. But she didn't say that, but I knew it. The issues came down to the question of did women have the right to do this because they wanted to, or is there any space from which one might make an ethical judgment about the creation of infants for either monetary exchange or simple transference? So for a number, nurses' associations showed this work to their membership as a discussion point. It was often seen as a way of opening up questions of, do we regard this as being like prostitution? What should be the legal position? What should be the medical profession's position? I was asked by a legal magazine to write an essay, which I didn't. So it was, except in a few idiosyncratic cases, the arguments came from either people who had a direct stake in moralizing or arguments that I don't understand. I don't see how I could be seen as an ally of the bourgeois couple. But the problematization was seen as something that was facilitated by this work, because it states a number of positions very clearly as to what are the points of decision. So that's been my experience. And it even won, this is strange, it won a documentary award at a video festival. It's not a documentary. I mean,
bueno,
you should translate, I'm sorry.
No, no está bien. La respuesta es que por parte de una audiencia más general o más, pero compuesta por mujeres, o sea, digamos una audiencia de mujeres, la reacción fue positiva. Los problemas empezaron a venir desde unos entornos académicos feministas en los que obtuvo la acusación de que había sido como alineada o cómplice de la pareja burguesa. De hecho, desde un público apareció de hecho un artículo en una revista feminista en la que una académica feminista atacaba la pieza y las implicaciones de la pieza, que se sabe que la autora de hecho era una madre, o sea, había recibido a su hijo o hija de una madre de alquiler. Pero bueno, la cuestión era plantear si las mujeres tienen el derecho de hacer esto, de contratar a madres de alquiler porque quieren, es decir, hay un espacio, una posición en el que se puede posibilitar un juicio ético sobre el hecho de obtener un niño a través de este proceso de alquiler y de compra-venta, en cierto sentido. Entonces, Claro, normalmente las asociaciones feministas enseñan la película como un caso de estudio, pero un caso de estudio como para plantear discusión y para abrir a preguntas. Muy en la misma línea que relacionarlo con discusiones sobre la prostitución, sobre cuál debe ser la posición de los médicos, de la ciencia en torno a este tipo de casos. Pero digamos que las reacciones problemáticas o los problemas empiezan a surgir sobre todo partiendo de posiciones que son específicamente idiosincráticas, es decir, que tienen una participación directa con alguno de los temas que toca el caso o los que el caso, digamos, se implica. Entonces, también una cosa que hace la obra, la película, es que todos los puntos en cuestión están como muy claramente especificados. Entonces eso también sirvió, en cierto sentido, como un caso de estudio. Pero bueno, y luego para terminar, que recibió un premio de mejor documental cuando no es un documental.
Me llama la atención o me genera curiosidad saber la recepción que tuvo también la película, si sabes, si en algún momento dado alguna de las dos familias supieron de la pieza y en ese caso también no me ha quedado claro, igual lo habéis dicho en la presentación, pero no me ha quedado claro cuál era exactamente, es decir, Piper, ¿cómo es? Piper Tiger.
Paper Tiger.
Yeah, ¿dónde se difundía exactamente la película?
Cable TV, ¿no?
Yeah.
Televisión por cable.
Televisión por cable que tiene
But they
acceso.
also rent the works there for rent.
Entonces, ¿qué audiencia tiene acceso a la película a través de la emisión de Paper Tiger? Eso por un lado, y por otro lado, si la familia, cualquiera de las dos familias, si tuvieron acceso a la pieza, si llegaron a saber, y en ese caso, ¿qué opinión tuvieron?
It's about reception and reaction. Once, if the families involved had access, could see what were the reaction, you know. And secondly, that was a question for Paper Tiger, is what type of audience has access to Paper Tiger?
I made no effort to contact the families. I figured they had enough annoyance from media figures and that it was inappropriate. I thought my point of view was fairly clear, and that Mary Beth Whitehead had enough troubles, and the Sterns were fairly well insulated through mediating agencies. Paper Tiger is, its programs are broadcast repeatedly by themselves every week. So anyone who has a cable contract in New York could see this, but they also rent the works and send them to festivals. And there's also uplinks that they do periodically. So this work has been going on for a long time, you know, and they keep their inventory in play. And of course, I've also shown it myself in art festivals and here. Yeah. This is not the first time it's been subtitled in Spanish, and broadcast.
Oh, okay.
Satellite.
Okay.
So it isn't just through your local cable station, but there's an association of community broadcasters in the U.S. They are often connected by satellite feeds to each other, and work circulate by being sent from these, for example, Paper Tiger to another small producer. They collectively produce works through an offshoot of Paper Tiger called Deep Dish, which also did a whole series on the Iraq War, on the alt-globalization movement in Seattle in 1999, and on issues like home and family life. So they take pieces of works and put them together. So, you know, remix.
Vale. Bueno, Marta no hizo absolutamente ningún esfuerzo para contactar a las familias porque creía que ya tenían suficientes problemas con todo, bueno, la problemática que había generado el caso y que consideraba inapropiado incluso contactarles. Creo que su punto de vista estaba bastante claro a través de la película. Volviendo al tema de, digamos, a la posición de las familias, Mary Beth Whitehead ya tenía bastantes problemas con todo lo que había ocurrido y en cambio los Stearns estaban como en una pequeña burbuja, insulados y aislados del resto. En cuanto a Paper Tiger TV, es una televisión que se emite por cable y que repite varias veces las emisiones, los programas. Por lo tanto, la audiencia que puede acceder a estos programas son la gente que tiene contrato de cable, pero también, por otra parte, ellos alquilan los programas Paper Tiger y los enseñan en festivales. Por otra parte, también muchas veces forman parte de una asociación comunitaria, digamos, de productores de televisión o de películas, de pequeños productores que envían los trabajos vía satélite y entonces eso ayuda de una manera colectiva a difundir de mayor manera las obras. También ha hablado de una plataforma que surge o que se disgrega de Paper Tiger TV, que es Deep Dish, ¿no? Que es como plato profundo, que ha hecho bastante trabajo sobre la guerra de Irak, sobre el movimiento de antiglobalización en Seattle, etcétera, etcétera. Entonces es como un poco una labor de remix, de reasamblaje y de trabajo colectivo y comunitario, de difusión.
Es que me ha gustado mucho esa frase de Paper Tiger sobre que la audiencia no eras tú, y eso me ha molado mucho. Entonces, dos preguntas. Si cuando hiciste la película eras consciente, partiendo de que la tele es toda actualidad y que lo que se emite hoy ya no tiene valor mañana, podría tener una vigencia en el tiempo. Y segundo, si crees que la pieza ha tenido más influencia como obra audiovisual y como instrumento político años más tarde, como ahora que la vemos, que en el momento que se hizo para dar respuesta al imaginario que estaban creando los medios.
So first, he really liked the sense of Paper TV that the audience is not you, and so there's two questions. If you were conscious of the fact that TV is like pure, like now it's pure actuality, so would they have any effect the work passing the time? I mean, what was your position when you created the piece of the effect of the piece during the after time? And then secondly, if you were conscious of the influence of the work as an audiovisual piece, but also as a political piece, as a response to the media structures and discourses of the time and of now.
I don't think that way. It's not. I'm always running forward. There's always discussion when I show it, but I don't have any idea what else is happening except when, you know, if it wins an award or something silly like that. So I have no idea.
But it's more the effect in the like future generations of future social political compositions. What effect is a piece going to have in a way?
How can you ask that about any particular work?
A ver, la respuesta es que
what I was trying to say is that using elements of TV that is made, you know, it's already made used for today and not used tomorrow, you know, just actuality and that's it. What I made, if you think of using those elements for a piece that is long-lasting, not that if you saw in advance that it would be, you know, a piece. And the idea was if that you really think that this piece had more influence as a political piece and right now or years after, that in answer of the in the moment that was created, you know.
I can't answer this. I never think this way. I don't even know how to think about things like that. Maybe I'm a lazy thinker, but I can't.
I doubt it.
I'm always, you know, when things come to my attention, they come to my attention. Otherwise, I'm doing something else. You know, I'm not one of these people who plots the course of their works through. When my work is shown, I usually don't record the work of mine that's shown because I don't want to be that. I'm not an archivist. I don't want to be a self-archivist. I don't get it even why anyone would do that, you know. So I apologize. I have no idea how to answer this question.
Bueno, la respuesta es que no tiene ni idea, que no sabe, que cada vez que ella se enfrenta a un trabajo no piensa, digamos, en el mañana o cómo va a ser entendida más tarde, que siempre que empieza a trabajar sobre algo es porque algo le llama la atención y si no estaría haciendo otra cosa que le llama la atención. Entonces que además tampoco le gusta grabar los restos o las huellas de su trabajo porque ella está en contra de la idea de convertirse en un archivista de su propio trabajo y que entonces que lo siente.
The other Paper Tiger piece that I made, I mentioned this morning, the piece reading Vogue magazine. I was really shocked that this is a work I'd never showed because it struck me as, it was 30 minutes and it seemed to me as viewing it that it should have been 10 minutes. And I kept trying to edit it and I could never edit it. So suddenly it's become extremely popular for the past 5 or 6 years and I couldn't figure out why until I realized it's because, A, the prominence of fashion is much greater now than even in the 80s, and B, young women see it in art school and they go, shit, nothing has changed. And so it's kind of like a piece of history that's pointing a finger at the world and the audience and saying, what are you going to do now? So in a way, it's that piece that does more what you were seeming to be asking about.
Que por otra parte, la otra pieza que ella hizo para Paper Tiger TV, que es Martha Rosler lee la revista Vogue, bueno, que para empezar fue un trabajo que ella no enseñó mucho, que de hecho cada vez que lo veía duraba 20 minutos y siempre se preguntaba ¿cómo puede durar tanto? Quiero reducirlo por lo menos a 10 minutos, que es lo que tendría que haber durado, pero que nunca fue capaz de editar o montar o cortar. Y bueno, el caso es que esta pieza en los últimos 5 o 6 años se ha convertido extremadamente popular por 2 razones. Una, porque la preeminencia de la moda es hoy en día mucho más potente, mucho más fuerte que incluso en los 80, que es cuando se hizo. Y 2, porque las mujeres jóvenes de hoy en día, cuando la ven, porque esta pieza se enseña mucho sobre todo en las escuelas de arte, estas mujeres lo que ven es que nada ha cambiado. Entonces, en conclusión, es como una pieza de historia que te está señalando y que te pregunta qué vamos a hacer ahora, ¿no?
And of course, we have to recognize that questions of surrogate motherhood are much less likely to attract the attention of young women who've been to art school or whatever than questions of the representation of young women.
Y que también está en juego el hecho de que cuestiones sobre el alquiler o madres de alquiler son mucho menos atractivas para jóvenes mujeres que van a las escuelas de arte que la representación de la mujer.
There's also something that I've been meaning to bring up, which is, first of all, I've heard repeatedly about these baby mills in India, both through the BBC and coverage in the US. Very troubling because of the cheerful way that the facilitators in England, it's always women, and so far, and in the US and in England talk about going to India and getting a baby or arranging to get a baby. In India, doctors set up these facilities where women are virtually held prisoner, as quite a number of them have said, for most of the 9 months to make sure that they eat properly and all this stuff, that, you know, it's a factory. This outsourcing means that it's invisible, because we don't like to think about outsourcing, because that dirty part of the world, we don't care. We just want the product, whether it's the iPhone or the infant. And as long as the doctor there says, yeah, we're keeping the womb healthy, don't worry, you know, everything's okay. But the other is a little bit more difficult. It has to do with gay men. And there's the normalization of gay, particularly middle-class gay people in the US and lots of other places, has centered on the idea they are just like you. They want to get married and have families. Well, the way that gay men have children, much more often than adoption, is by hiring surrogate mothers. So there's no way this is going to get bad press. So on the one hand, it's offshored, and on the other hand, it's about welcoming to the world of the bourgeois householder gay men. And that which is, you know, not for me to make any judgments about, but to remark on. So as part of the normalization of gay marriage, male gay marriage, the normalization of surrogacy contracts has been brought along.
Bueno, Is it baby mills?
Baby mill.
Vale. Que
We have puppy mills.
Yeah. I'm getting impressed. Bueno, que hay la cuestión de las baby mills, que son como los molinos se traduciría literalmente como molinos de bebés, que se está viendo mucho hablar en la BBC y también en otros medios sobre estos molinos de niños en India. O sea, tienen unos discursos como muy entusiastas, muy benevolentes, sobre estas mujeres muy felices y muy animadas que hablan sobre su viaje a India, sobre su experiencia de ir allí e intentar, bueno, pues arreglar el tener un niño allí. El caso es que además la mujer cuando va allí, y ese tipo de acuerdo al que llega con los médicos, no es solamente la madre de alquiler, pero sobre todo la manutención de esa madre durante esos 9 meses para que la madre esté bien nutrida y dé a luz a un niño sano. El problema aquí es, una vez más, es esa exportación, ese sacar fuera el problema para invisibilizarlo, de manera que todo ese trabajo sucio o no bonito o abyecto incluso no se ve y lo único que recibimos es el producto, ya sea un niño o un iPhone. Pero es decir, es un sistema de factoría o de producción. Por otra parte, está el caso de los hombres gays, que el caso, como la normalización de los hombres homosexuales de clase media, en el caso de Estados Unidos, pero es que las peticiones que se está haciendo desde este grupo es que ellos quieren ser vosotros, o sea, digamos, esa normalización de las parejas gay al mismo nivel que las parejas heterosexuales. Entonces, esto, como pertenecen a un grupo que es de clase media gay, no va a recibir mala prensa o malas críticas, sino que se va a seguir con esa normalización de las... perdona, es que se me olvidó decir una cosa. No va a recibir mala prensa porque normalmente las parejas homosexuales de las parejas de hombres gays van a ser padres mediante madres de alquiler. Entonces, en este caso, digamos, el alquiler de estas madres no va a recibir una mala prensa debido a esta normalización de este grupo de hombres gays de clase media. Entonces, tenemos los dos casos por un lado, en dos manos. Por un lado, esa exportación y esa invisibilización de las mujeres europeas que que alquilan mujeres en India, y por otra parte la aceptación de esas madres de alquiler por parte de los grupos de hombres gays de clase media.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Bueno, varios temas, pero no voy a intentar mezclarlos demasiado. Por un lado, hay toda una problemática que está corriendo en paralelo en el vídeo, que es el tema de la adopción, no ya de los vientres de alquiler, sino de las problemáticas vinculadas con la adopción que podríamos relacionar en este caso, sobre todo con los vientres de alquiler, en el caso de las parejas homoparentales, de las parejas gays, que creo que también es un tema que está ahí, simplemente por comentarlo como apunte. Y luego, realmente me ha sorprendido mucho que una de las críticas fuese a que tenías una visión más próxima a la pareja burguesa de la película que realiza la adopción, cuando a mí uno de los temas que más me interesaba de toda la pieza era cómo construir una pieza posicionada claramente políticamente y construyendo el discurso desde allí, que al mismo tiempo pudiese incluir muchas voces y permitiese la entrada desde tantos puntos de vista. Es decir, cómo un posicionamiento político no implica cerrar el discurso en un punto, sino tener claro desde dónde se habla y de esa forma hacer una pieza inclusiva de otras voces, aunque en este caso las voces las representas tú misma. Y luego una de las voces que me interesaba, que era la del personaje sin voz, que es la esposa, que incluso en las ocasiones en las que interviene siempre es como cita, es decir, eres tú hablando de las palabras de esa mujer. Entonces me interesaba también esa supuesta neutralidad de la figura de la esposa, es decir, ese otro personaje femenino que recibió un tratamiento muy específico en base a precisamente esa corrección neutral e invisibilizadora, que también me resultaba muy, muy interesante.
First, it was he has remarked alongside with the video, there's the parallel problem of the adoption that is being raised, and that actually can be related to the gay couples that want to have a child.
So by the wife.
Huh?
Adoption by the...
No, the wife is the second question.
Oh.
So first is more like a remark on the subject of the adoption that we haven't also spoken, because it's also in relation with surrogacy, because it's always a mother who has to be adopted, but that actually this issue of the adoption can also be related to the gay couples. Yeah. Okay, and secondly, that regarding the critiques that you had received of your vision being near to the bourgeois couple, what is interesting is, what he found really interesting is like, how do you build a piece that is politically positioned, but at the same time that can gather multiple voices and multiple points of view, standpoints. That is that the piece is not closed, but allows the entrance through multiple points of view. So, and so how to build an inclusive piece, especially, and there is a character that he really remarked is the characters without voice, which is the stern wife, which is never has a voice, but is always quoted. So she has this supposed
observation, and there's a reason which
there is a supposed neutrality of the wife, neutral and invisible at the same time.
Right. I'm glad you asked this. It's a little complicated because the adoption question, I also had a little trouble with your accent, sorry. It's a little difficult for me. But I do see the piece as opening a number of different nodal points of choice movements. In my talk, but not here, I mean in the talk that I talked about the positioning of Dr. Stern, the wife. The strategy of the lawyer was to never have her speak, because he's a divorce lawyer, and he presented this as a fight between the bad mother and the good father. And the bad mother has this appendage garbage man, and the good father has a doctor appendage who doesn't speak but will be the nurturing woman because she's virtuous. And she had no public role except to stand there smiling. And I did actually discuss that. I only enacted it here. I didn't actually say that she was subtracted from this, so that it wasn't a case between a couple and a woman, but between a woman and a man fighting over their half of the baby.
Bueno, que es una observación muy interesante porque, bueno, en primer lugar, la cuestión de la multiplicidad de los puntos de vista o de puntos de entrada es porque la pieza está constituida como diferentes puntos nodales que permiten una serie de movimientos para acercarte. Y luego que en la posición de la doctora Stern, la mujer en la pareja contratante, es cierto que no la ha planteado aquí, pero que sí que se trabajó en la presentación, en la charla que dio antes de hacer la película. Y tiene una razón el por qué está invisibilizada o por qué está neutralizada. La posición de la doctora Stern estuvo muy pensada y repensada por el abogado. Digamos, esa posición se incluía dentro de una estrategia muy bien pensada. Él era un abogado de divorcios, es decir, bueno, es un abogado que se dedicaba a los divorcios. Entonces, lo que le interesaba era plantear una lucha o un conflicto entre el padre bueno y la madre mala. El padre bueno que tiene un apéndice bueno, que es la mujer doctora con una profesión respetable y además con una práctica virtuosa que por ende le constituye como mujer, o sea, como madre buena, y contra, en cambio, la madre mala, que su apéndice es su marido basurero. Y entonces que es algo que no lo ha comentado aquí, pero que, digamos, en la pieza se performea, o sea, se percibe y se representa así. Esa subtracción de la que la doctora Stern también fue parte en la estrategia y en cómo se representó el caso, porque lo importante era ver esa pelea de la madre biológica contra el padre biológico, con todo ese manicaísmo de bueno y malo.
We're finished?
I have a question too, actually.
Thank you for your questions. Thank you. Thank you so much for your